Hi, Linny.
Hi, Nancy.
Welcome to episode 126 of the Front Porch Book Club.
The Front Porch Book Club is a podcast that meets twice a month.
We like to dig deep into the relationship between characters and the worlds they live in.
Grab your book and iced tea and join us on the Front Porch.
Linny, today we get to interview Jane Park about her debut novel, Inheritance. Jane is a second-generation Korean-Canadian writer. She is a MacDowell Fellow and was a participant in the Banff Center's writing studio and Diaspora Dialogues. She was born in Edmonton, Alberta, lived in New York City for over a decade, and now lives in Calgary, Alberta. Currently, she's pursuing an MFA at the University of British Columbia. And as I said, Inheritance is her debut novel.
I know, and we got her.
Yes, it's so fun.
What a nice lady she is. You know, I like to dissect people.
That is your background as a counselor, yes.
But I was surprised at the similarities of her and Anne.
Yes.
Like talking to her about the fine arts and what her interests are and her experiences and all of that.
And her parents had a grocery store.
Yeah. Yes. Living in New York. Just those themes that she put in her book.
Yeah.
And how not only does she talk to a lot of people that are in similar experiences and did her research, but that Anne character just kind of flooded out of her, I think.
Yeah. Well, let's get to it. Welcome, Jane, to our front porch.
Thank you for having me on.
Well, we're so excited to have you and so happy you could join us. This has got to be so much fun for you. This is your first novel. What got you interested in being an author and writing stories?
Oh, gosh. Well, that started in childhood. I was always a reader. And it's actually beneficial having parents that owned a grocery store because their way of making me a reader was just dropping me off at the library, and I just stayed there until right before it closed, and then I walked home. We didn't have internet back then, so my dopamine hits came by going to the library and reading books. And that was the only thing to do. Part of my childhood was living in a small town. Usually I was the only one in this library. And, you know, I read all of Sweet Valley High, all of V.C. Andrews. I shouldn't have been reading V.C. Andrews at that age. Mm-hmm. And I was a reader first before I became a writer. I think writing came as an extension of my enthusiasm for reading.
At what point in your life did you start writing and not just reading?
So in tandem with reading, I was writing. But as an immigrant kid, you're never going to tell your parents, I'm going to be a writer when you grow up, because we didn't know any writers. And that's not a real job, right? So I knew I loved writing. Like, it just was something that brought me great joy, but I also knew it could be a hobby. And so it was always kind of compartmentalized as something that I enjoyed doing. And I actually did write books when I was little. And then when I went to university, I studied English Lit. I enjoyed reading books, and I did write on the side. Eventually, I did move to New York. And for the first time, I met actual writers that were BIPOC, that were Asian. When I met Asian people saying, I'm going to be a writer when I grow up, I was like, what? Like, how can you say that out loud? That was so ballsy. I think when I moved to New York, that's when I understood this could be actually something one could do if you're a Korean immigrant kid. But that also takes a lot of discipline, and I didn't have that discipline. But I did have a drive, and this was actually a 20-year book in the making.
Wow.
Yeah.
20 years, then. Okay, you don't look that old.
I am old.
Start?
It's hard eye. 2006, I was in New York. I was disgruntled with my job, and part of my way of rebelling is being in front of my screen pretending I was working, but I was actually writing flash fiction.
Oh, so, I really love that.
You had a very concentrated Asian worker in front of a screen writing flash fiction because it was just my way of blowing off steam. And I would just write flash fiction. And one time, like, this voice came of a disgruntled tax lawyer who was a Korean immigrant kid. And I just went with it. And then I just followed that voice. And that's how this book came about. The beginning scenes of my novel was from that disgruntled job where it started it all.
Wow. Well, I'm already learning a lot, I think, about the parallels in this book and your personal journey.
A lot of it is the superficial parallels, but the actual characters, they were voices that I chased. So when I first started my first paragraph, she introduces herself as a tax lawyer, and then she brags that her parents came to New York and they just wanted to visit her office rather than, like, that was the first place they wanted to visit. And there was so much reverence seeing her at her job in the law office. And I knew that the father had passed away. I knew that the brother was in rehab and that the mother had this unreliable voice. And maybe the narrator did as well. But it was kind of like this thread that I was given that I had to just follow and chase. Yeah, I don't want to sound woo-woo, but it was very much following the voice and then figuring out what happened.
So you have this novel on your computer. Then what do you do?
The lucky thing is in Canada, there's a lot of mentorship programs and writing programs for aspiring writers. And I would apply to them and then I would get them. And I think, okay, there has to be something if the judges or the adjudication people said, okay, she's in, right? So that kind of was affirmation. And I was working with one mentor who I met at the BAM Center, Shyam Salvadori. He was just a great mentor to me. And he encouraged me. And just hearing somebody who is a very famous writer say, this is good, keep going, meant so much. I felt very lucky to work with Shyam. So this book, I kept stalking Shyam. He was in certain programs and I would just apply and say, I want Shyam as my mentor. So he was my mentor at the BAM Center. He was my mentor at Humber College.
Oh, I love that.
And he was my mentor at Diaspora Dialogue. So he was always like, what the heck? This Korean lady keeps chasing me. And what happened was during COVID, I would say my novel was about 80% done. And at that point, I had 2 kids and they were young. And it was 80% done before I had my first child. And most people that were writers were like, finish your novel before your first child. And I was like, yeah, it's fine. I had brain fog, so I wasn't really able to write. I mean, I was like 20%. I can just finish it when my kid's born. It's fine, right?
Yeah, because they nap, right?
Yeah, it's cool. I got this. So then I had another kid and then I just was so far removed from that person I once was. And then COVID happened. And then for personal reasons, I kind of hit rock bottom. And it's weird because when I was at rock bottom, the only thing I wanted to do was write. And so I was like, okay, I got to write. But I had 2 young kids and they just have needs that you can't ignore. So what I did was at that point, because of COVID, I didn't know if financially we'd survive. And Canada has a great grant system. So I applied for the Canada Council of the Arts. And you can apply for grant money as an individual artist for your project. You have to give a reason of what you're going to do with the money. And I just wrote, I need babysitting money to finish my novel.
Because my kids aren't napping.
Because it's impossible, really. But it's funny. Alice Munro is one of Canada's most famous writers. And I read a biography of her. And in the 70s, when she had her 3 kids, she applied for the same Canada Council grant. And the reason she wrote for the grant was, I need babysitting money. And they denied her at that point because it wasn't legitimate for a writer to need babysitting money to finish her novel. Alice Munro luckily kept at it without any grant money, and she became Alice Munro. But I was kind of like testing the Canada Council, like, is this legit enough to want babysitting money? And I got it. And I was like, okay, cool. So I got my babysitting money and I hired a part-time babysitter. And then I was able to finish the rest of the 20%. And it was interesting because at that point, I was a new mother and I had such a maternal instinct for my characters now. And it's like something changed in me as a writer where I just felt this maternal tenderness and desire to protect my characters afterwards. So I did think that 20%, there was more of a richness as a result of having my life sidelined by having 2 kids.
And it shows how far we've come, that now you can get grant money because somebody has to take care of the children if I want to be a writer.
Yeah, I went to a couple residencies and you have men that come that have kids, but you rarely see a woman with young kids at these residencies because it's very hard.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the themes that you've said you write about is the Korean immigrant experience. Tell us about your interest in exploring aspects of the Korean immigrant experience.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, so just growing up, I always knew that our family's different, and I'd make jokes about how dysfunctional we were, and like my white friends would really give nervous laughters, whereas my Korean friends would howl with laughter because like they get it. So in the 70s and the 80s, a lot of Koreans came over to Canada and America to immigrate. So there's a huge wave of diaspora and then second generation kids that came as a result. So I felt very comfortable joking with Korean, Canadian, Korean Americans because like you can say something dark and disturbing and they just howl with laughter. There's like white friends are like, oh, wow, that's very interesting. Or,
Yeah.
But the interesting thing about our diaspora is our parents sort of came of age during the Korean War. Their parents, so the grandparents came of age during the Japanese annexation. So there's like all these layers of dysfunction and trauma. On top of that, there is the Confucian element where it's a very shame-based society. So you don't talk about mental health. You don't talk about trauma. You just push it down and you honor your family. And so there's a lot of dysfunction that's very particular to the Korean second generation diaspora that I've just kind of picked up. And I put my observations in the book.
So, Jane, were you born in Canada?
Yes, I was. My parents were born in Korea. They moved over and then, I was born in Canada.
Okay.
So I'm considered second generation. My parents are considered first generation.
Yeah, that interest in family honor really comes through in this book, and that is such a value the parents hold, and they are trying desperately to transmit to their children that family comes first. You have these particular roles that you are expected to play, and the kids really struggle with that.
Yeah, and I can't emphasize enough the role of the oldest son, because the whole Confucian principles is centered around the oldest son. The oldest son is the patriarch, and I really was interested in contrasting the role of the eldest son to a daughter because, again, in the Confucian hierarchy, the daughter's kind of like the bottom of the list of priorities of the 5 relationships. Like Confucian lays out 5 relationships. First is ruler and subject. Second is father and son. The daughter's not even mentioned, right? I mean, scholars can say, oh, daughter. Like the daughter was kind of the bottom of the barrel in terms of priority. But it's interesting because in my own observations, when I see how the daughters and the sons fared for the second generation, the daughters were the ones who became the success, whereas the sons were under so much pressure to succeed. And many did, but some didn't. And that's just a very interesting dynamic that I wanted to explore through my novel.
Mm-hmm. My mind goes in so many different areas because you hit so many different ideas and experiences. One is the religious, which we'll get to in a minute, but this whole generational trauma, and that it doesn't just stop. She's born in Canada and her brother is, but they experience the trauma that their parents left from the war and what they're carrying with them and the generation before them. And the father becomes abusive. The family is kind of intact at the beginning, but then things kind of unravel as the kids get older. I love that you have the characters grow to the point where they're going to break some of that cycle as adults and not carry it on to that next generation.
Yeah. Thank you for picking up on that, because when I was writing this novel, I was really interested in second generation Holocaust literature. I love the writing of Ava Hoffman, Anne Karf, and Alice Kaplan. They're all second generation Holocaust survivors. So what happens is these kids are born without actually experiencing the Holocaust, and yet they have so many issues, and yet these issues can't be legitimate because they actually didn't encounter the trauma their parents did. And it really resonated with me. And so I know the Holocaust is not the same with the Korean War. It's on a different scale, obviously, but I was very interested in that transference of trauma that these writers, these Jewish writers, wrote about. And that really informed me while I was writing.
I'm very interested in that as well. Is there a specific book that you could recommend?
Oh gosh, I love Ava Hoffman. She wrote a book called After Such War and then a memoir called Lost in Translation. And it's just so beautiful and it really took my breath away. And when I read books like that, it just makes me want to be a writer. And then I recommend Anne Carf's The War After and Alice Kaplan's French Lessons. And I do feel like the Asian diaspora, the Chinese that immigrated over, whose parents went through the Cultural Revolution, the Vietnamese that immigrated over, whose parents went obviously through the war. Like there's just so many traumas that happened. And then the second generation, we land in Canada and it's like, you're fine. Like just suck it up and just, you're lucky you get food. And it's like, no, like we're depressed. And it's like, no, just don't be depressed. I see these themes in a lot of Asian diasporic writings, and it's very interesting.
Yeah, there are a couple places in the novel where one of the characters will be talking to Anne and say something like, her friend Yura says, "Don't be so heavy. Don't be depressed. The white people don't like it. That makes them uncomfortable." Anyway, there are a couple places in the novel where you are reflecting on the heaviness that she carries as a second generation.
Yeah. But I don't even think those kids can articulate why they feel heavy.
Right.
For the longest time, I just was like, okay, I'm just a morose person. I'm emo, whatever. So were a lot of my cohorts that were second gen. And now I'm a mother, so I'm reading books about parenting.
Are you consciously trying to parent to end that cycle, like Linda talked about, ending that cycle of trauma so that your kids aren't carrying that?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
So I made a joke with my friend the other day. Do you know that video of Bill Gates drinking sewer water?
No.
There's some technology which converts sewage into water.
Okay.
Bill Gates had a cup that was filled with sewage, and then through the filtration process, it's a cup of water and he drank it. And I was like, that's us. Like we're that filter where we take the sewage and then we have to filter that to clean water for our kids' sake. We have to convert that sewage into clear water or our kids are going to grow up with their own specific dysfunction. And it's so hard.
That's a lot of hard work.
It is, but it's going to be harder work if you don't take care of that trauma.
Right.
And Anne's parents think that the way that they're shielding their kids is by not talking about it. But for Anne, she says she's bereft. That leaves a hole in her understanding of who she is. And she feels like she is missing crucial stories she needs to know to understand herself. So what is the trade-off between a child understanding themselves and where they come from and not dumping trauma on them?
Yeah. So when I became a parent, I was reading a lot of parenting books, and like the number one indicator for a child to turn out emotionally sound or stable is to have parents that have dealt with their past. So you don't necessarily have to tell your child about your past, but you do have to deal with it. That's very hard. But I do want to address like our parents' generation, the first generation. So Korea is a very shame-based culture where you don't talk about mental illness. If there's someone mentally ill in your family, you never talk about them and you sort of hide them, and you don't go to therapy, because if you go to therapy, that means you're crazy. Mm-hmm. I don't think they even had a language or a means to deal with mental health. It is very rare. I don't even know of any Korean first generations from my parents' generation that have seen a therapist, when if they came of age during a war, that would be so healing. Yeah. There's a lot that is very specific to my second generation diaspora cohorts that I just wanted to write about. And I'm glad that you picked up on that, Nancy.
Yeah, very interesting. So I was very intrigued by the ill-gotten and ill-used angangdo, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correct. Please let me know if I'm not. So the knife was carried by Korean noblewomen to kill themselves if they were raped. And it seems like the knife is a tool to ensure family honor. But in the novel, it seems very symbolic that too much emphasis on family honor can be harmful. So tell us about the unjangdo.
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 It's hard.
Yeah.
Sorry.
My mouth is not going in there. One more time.
Unjangdo.
Unjangdo. And your thoughts about its appearance in your novel.
Yeah, well, it's something I've been obsessed with. So in the 80s, I visited Korea, and my cousin gave me a plastic version of the unjangdo. And I had no idea what it was. It was like a plastic knife. So I was like, oh, what is this for? My cousin was significantly older than me. He put his fist in a ball, hit his chest, gave a pained expression, and smiled. And I was like, okay, like I have no idea what that means, but whatever. But I later found out that knife was an unjangdo, and Korean noblewomen would wear that. When you look online at Google web searches, it says it was also used for self-defense, but most Korean women of my generation know this to be an honor killing knife. And so it's just a very disturbing element. Why would a woman have to take her life? Why could she not attack her attacker? Mm-hmm. It speaks very much about the role of woman. It speaks very much about who's at fault for the violence. But that's another tangent. But yeah, it's just something that I've just been obsessed with. And then when I was writing this novel, I think another thing about my second generation cohorts is we don't really have an inheritance. We don't have hope chests. Our parents, most of them came over, they were very poor. They came with 1 or 2 suitcases. That's it. That's how you started in Canada or America. So we don't have inheritance. And I thought, what could be an inheritance that Anne could have? And that knife came to mind. And then from there, it makes its appearance throughout the novel.
Mm-hmm. So curious in reading this book, and I loved all the different stories and ideas that you threw into it. I live in the Northeast, and it seems like to me, from the little that I know and have experienced, that there's a lot of similarities between people that came to America and immigrated and people that came to Canada.
Yeah. So in the 70s and 80s, a lot of Koreans wanted to go to America. Like that was the promised land. And Canada was kind of like plan B, right? Because the whole world was obsessed with America. It was just such a place to be. My father actually applied to the America consulate to immigrate over. He was granted an interview and he said he would come to be a car mechanic. So my mom, for the interview, she really dressed up to the nines. Like she dressed in her best suit and she got her hair done and she just did not look like a car mechanic's wife. And so the energy in that interview was off. And the interviewer kept looking at my mom saying, "Are you sure?" Thinking, how can this woman be a car mechanic's wife? And they didn't get a spot. They got declined. Wow. So as default, my dad said, okay, we didn't get into the US. We go to Canada. I think America wanted more professionals and Canada was willing to wasn't as picky, I guess, for lack of a better word. So I find that in America, when I meet other Kyopos, there's kind of like an elite class of second gen Koreans whose parents were professionals. They were professors. They were educated in the States. Whereas in Canada, they were all entrepreneurs. We came with nothing. Whereas in America, it seems more like there's a really elite Korean American and then the working class that kind of got by.
Yeah, I can kind of see that. And then that makes me wonder too about the prejudice then. Poor Anne and her brother did experience a lot of that. And the parents did too. Nobody was coming to the grocery store, but the kids were kind of mean and there was a lot going on there. Obviously that happens in America too, but I'm wondering if the socioeconomic standing doesn't diminish that a little bit.
Again, it's two-tier. So I have a character in my novel, Kathy, who contrasts with Anne.
Yes.
She's the elite Korean American. Mm-hmm. Her father was a professional. Her mother went to Juilliard, studied piano, and now she's raising her kids. So That's Kathy. And I wanted to contrast that with Anne and their friendship, the weird dynamics where Anne really doesn't say much to Kathy and just listens to Kathy talk. Yeah. So in terms of racism, definitely like there was the LA riots in America. Like I do feel like the racism I faced in the 80s, especially could be easily transferred over to the States. Because I do read a lot of second generation Korean writers, and when they address racism, it's very familiar to me.
Yeah, for sure. So Charles' computer is a real flashpoint in this family. And I love Charles and his passion for computing. And he's really a visionary in a lot of ways. The father does not understand the promise of computing and really works to destroy Charles' passion. It seems like the father is acting from a place of fear, and the fear of the new, the fear of a world that he doesn't understand. The father seems very rigid in a lot of ways, like there is one path my son must follow. Any other path that I don't have control over in a way is something to be feared and destroyed. What about that fear of the unknown and the character of the father and how he really deteriorates throughout this novel?
Yeah, so that's again from my observations of the Korean second gen diaspora. You know, if you're a child from a Confucian family structure, you're given a script and your job is to obey the script. It's not to deviate from it. And what happened was when a lot of Koreans did immigrate over to Canada and America in the 70s and 80s, they kind of just froze in time. So their Confucianism, when they left Korea in 1970s, preserved onwards, you know, whereas Koreans started modernizing, they started becoming more modern. So they used to make fun of kyopos, which are diasporic Koreans. When we came back, they're like, you guys are so old fashioned in the way you think. You remember the Hongs or kids?
Yes.
They're like, you're so old fashioned.
Yes.
And we were just kind of teased acting like 1970s mentality, morality, you know, that was the diaspora because we were raised with parents who froze in time. So we're given a script and you cannot rebel. You cannot go against it. It's very Confucian. You just keep your head down and you go by the script. You know, I really wanted to explore a child who follows the script and a child who does not and rebels. And also, like, why are there no Asian entrepreneurs that made it during that time? Why are they all white males? I do wonder if there was a child who had the same vision as Jeff Bezos, what would happen?
Yes.
Probably not much, because you could not disobey the father without dire consequences. And I know so many Korean boys that got kicked out of their house, that there was just so much conflict because there was so much pressure for them to follow the script. And if they refused, it was just the worst thing you could do. These Korean boys are just nice kids that just wanted to do their own thing. It's not like they were terrible, but it's a very common trope that I saw growing up that I wanted to explore.
I had no idea that was part of this common thread with people. Wow. I've always seen, I guess from my point of view, a real intact family and certainly cultural differences, but never realized the amount of pressure.
You see so many kids, again, from the second gen 70s, 80s diaspora that became doctors and lawyers. And
Right.
it's like, wow, you're such a success, model minority, pat on the back. But there was a price that got paid, whether the children realize it or not. Kind of living with a script that someone handed over to you, there's a cost to that.
I loved Charles and who he was throughout the book. You decided to give Charles an addiction, which you can understand why he went there. But is that a common concern?
I don't think so. It's just, I really wanted to explore an extreme tension and the extreme results of a tension. But in general, like, I don't know, if you did studies, I don't think there would be like more percentage.
Okay.
But I just wanted to up the ante, up the stakes, up the results. Yeah, but with Charles, when I wrote a scene where his life was just coming apart, I was just sobbing at my desk. And I didn't want this as a writer, but I had to go through with it. And that was very hard for me to write because I felt so attached.
Well, and it was hard to read because you understand Charles has so much promise and he is such a good kid, but he's just a kid who wants to explore what he wants to explore. And he is, unfortunately abused, especially by his dad, and then kicked out of the house. I mean, he just doesn't deserve any of what happens to him.
Yeah. But again, like in a Confucian family structure, because he's the oldest son, he needs to obey because he's going to be the next patriarch. His inheritance is as the oldest son. It's a very important role. And that's why Korean women wanted sons so badly. It was like a culture that worshiped the son, the oldest son. And once you were the oldest son, you were born with so much responsibility. And I really wanted to explore that and then ante up the stakes and just write an extreme kind of conflict.
And that really comes through how that is an oppression in his life and leads to the shattering of his relationship with his dad, and then splinters his relationship with his mom for a while. And then also the thing that Linny and I loved when we were talking about this in the previous episode is how, as the eldest son, his mom just completely dotes on him in a very unhealthy ways.
We see that here and there with some moms we know.
When you just place so much pressure on an eldest son, it just skews the whole family dynamics in order. I think now Koreans want daughters more than sons.
Oh.
Whereas before, it was like a culture that pressured women so much to give birth to a son, because to give birth to a son meant your heritage would continue.
Right. And you want somebody to take care of you when you're old.
That's a really good point, Linny. That was your retirement plan.
Yeah.
Right.
Somebody's going to take care of me.
Because if you didn't have an oldest son, that meant you had no retirement. And that was very scary because you didn't have anyone to look after you. So families would just continue having daughters and daughters and daughters. And, there was so much pressure on the woman to give birth to a son.
Wow.
And it really just distorted and skewed a lot of things, relationships included.
Why do you think that has changed now that daughters are maybe more preferred?
I don't think Korean abides to Confucian rules as much.
Okay.
But they also understand daughters, they're the ones that will push your wheelchair when you're 80, likelihood. Yeah. They're the ones that care about the relationship and so forth. I think there's less of an expectation that the parents need to live with the child. So I think Koreans now, they want to be financially independent, so they're not going to be a burden to their children. And I think that put the pressure off of the oldest son or the desire to even have a son.
Are there any other aspects of Confucianism that are interwoven in this book that I would not have picked up on? Because honestly, I am not that familiar with Confucianism. Certainly the eldest son aspect, but any other aspects?
I've never read a book on Confucianism. It's nothing I formally studied, but it's so much part of my DNA and how I function. Confucianism is all about keeping your head down, being part of a group, not being the squeaky wheel, whereas Western culture is all about the individual, following your passion, becoming the person you're meant to be. And in my novel, I wanted to explore the dynamics of a very Confucian family and children that have dreams outside of that script. Yeah, it's weird because I never consulted any books on Confucianism while I was writing, but it's so much a part of this book and who I am as well.
And you really illustrate that difference of keeping your head down, playing your role with these Canadian kids who are like, well, what do you want to be when you grow up? They aren't thinking anything about any adherence to expectations. They're just free to do whatever they want, for good or for bad. I mean, I think some of those kids make some probably poor decisions also.
Yeah, but it's their life.
Right.
And they get to make the mistakes. And if they make a mistake, it's on them. It's not the whole family gets weighed down. Anne has a lot of jealousy towards her BFFs. And a lot of that is because they get to be raised Western style.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. One of the things you've said is that you like to explore God and that you're always thinking about God. What aspects of God are most intriguing to you?
Specifically for this book, while I was working on it, at that point, I attended Redeemer Presbyterian Church in New York.
Oh, that's a big one.
Yeah. And Tim Keller was doing a sermon on the prodigal son's brother, the eldest son.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
So the prodigal son, everybody kind of assumes it's a lesson on wayward son who at the end gets grace from his father. But what Tim Keller was saying is it's more about the eldest son too, because it's about somebody who did all the right things, checked all the right boxes. And at the end, you don't even know if he has grace or if he's saved.
Mm-hmm.
That also made me thinking about my plot and the siblings. One follows a script, the other does not, and what happens to them. So it's just kind of part of my brain and writing. It's nothing that I set out saying, I'm going to take this parable and make another parable out of it. That's something that I was really thinking about while I was working on this novel.
And that parable ends up in your book also.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And she hates it, right?
Yeah, she does. It's very dissatisfying to the eldest child. I will say that.
Yeah, she's horrified. Like, it is a terrible parable. If you did everything right, you stayed, you took care of the cows and the shepherd, and you never got a feast for you. And all of a sudden, your brother, like the one who did everything wrong, gets the calf killed. Like, that's not fair.
And your reward is, I was with you all the time. That's part of the problem.
Yeah. So that's a very interesting dynamic that organically entered into my novel.
So you're a writer, but I was stalking some of your social media. You have some other talents. You posted that you created silkscreen book plates for readers who pre-ordered this book. How did you get into silkscreening? And what other hobbies or talents do you have that we don't know about?
Well, if I could do life over again, I would want to pursue being a fine artist.
Yes.
There's something about getting your hands dirty and painting. So I've always been this repressed artist that tried to live a conventional life, but failed at it. And I love taking hobby courses. Like, I always see art as a hobby. So like, I love silk screening. I love drawing. So for social media, we're in 2026. Prior to 2025, I wasn't really on the internet, but when you're debuting in 2026, you cannot be anonymous. So I've just been having to do social media. But one thing that has really brought me joy is doing comics. I love drawing. I love doodling. And so some of my posts are just comics, and I have a lot of joy and fun drawing and silk screening and just doing fine art stuff. And if I can do life again, I would do a BFA.
Well, I'll tell you, it's not too late. You've got plenty of life ahead of you. You could still do a BFA, but I will tell you, I'm just like you. I am a hobbyist course person. I've taken painting courses and weaving,
pottery.
You can see by the pile of fabric in the back. I love to sew. So I'm with you, but I think it's interesting. Anne is a frustrated fine artist also.
Yes. So I just wanted to give that thread or that hint that these kids don't fit that script that's given to them. Anne decides, I'm going to follow the script. Charles decides, I'm not going to follow that script. But they both do not fit that script. And I do sense that that happens a lot with immigrant kids. They're faced with a choice. Will I accept the script or not?
And the consequences of that, the consequences of going along with the script, okay, parental acceptance, love, but what are you giving up of yourself, which Anne has to struggle throughout the whole book to figure out who she is. Charles, ejection from the family and everything that he knows.
Yeah. The stakes were so much higher for immigrant kids because what you chose as your career didn't affect you. It was part of the whole family, right? I just have a lot of compassion for the kids that grew up, my cohorts, that if they accepted or rejected the script, either way, I have so much compassion for them. If they became the doctor so that they could buy their parents a house and a Mercedes and a vacation, I applaud that. There's something very noble about sacrificing your life because you saw your parents work and struggle so much. At the same time, if you grew up and you rejected that script and you got kicked out and then you just kind of figured it out without parental support or family support, again, I have so much empathy and compassion for that.
I'm glad that you brought all of this to light because I understand it so much better now.
Yeah, thank you.
And I love at the one point where the father ups the stakes even more. It's not just our family, it's all Koreans. And it's just not all Koreans, it's all Asians and Indians as well. The whole world is
on your shoulder.
That's right.
Based on what you do. Get back to school, buddy.
Yeah, no, a lot of my cohorts got that speech.
Oh, no.
Just marry a Korean. Make sure you marry a Korean when you grow up. Your behavior reflects on the Chinese, on the Japanese. You're representing all these ethnicities and countries. You have to overachieve in order to be at the same level.
Yes. And the father, again, who really is spouting all of these things very explicitly. We have to be much better than these white people. We can't be the same as. We have to be much better, which is the story of a minority population.
I think so.
Anywhere, unfortunately.
Yeah.
The feeling like to be just as good as, that's not going to get us anywhere. We have to be better.
Yeah. Exceptional.
I was really glad that Mom got a little bit of a backbone and got a life.
Yeah.
That she could be happy and see her own arc as a character. She was growing and she was overcoming, and she's now able to tell her story and some of her legacy and possibly a new love interest at the end of the book. I loved all of that.
I loved writing her.
Because she was stuck.
Yeah. I have to say, so the mother represents the ajumma, and ajumma in Korean is a middle-aged woman, typically with kids.
Okay.
It's called ajumma culture. Ajumma is used as an adjective very lovingly among Koreans, like, that's very ajumma style. And like, it really is a specific thing. Do you remember Psy's Gangnam video? The Gangnam style video. Did you watch it?
Yeah.
Do you remember the ladies on the bus with the visors?
Yes.
That's ajumma.
Okay. Gotcha.
So Korea, after the Korean War, it was one of the poorest countries in the world. Now it's a top industrial country. And I would say it's the ajumma that brought Korea there, because the ajumma has sacrificed so much of her life for her children and her husband's career, and did anything she could to give their children the best education, the best opportunities that the world can offer. And the ajumma is a woman who transformed modern Korea. Like, I would just give so much credit to the ajumma. Yeah, so I had a lot of fun writing the mother character because I got to play with the ajumma like ideas that I had in my head.
Well, I could kind of see that visor coming out at the end of the book. She's coming into her own. She's going to start singing and dancing soon.
Yeah, there was this Facebook post that I saw like a decade ago, and it was about older ajummas in LA. And these two Korean men that were younger started dance classes for the ajummas because these ajummas never grew up dancing. They were always having to work in factories, bring money for their families, and then they had babies and support their husbands' careers and then support their children and try to get them into Harvard. Like, they just did so much. And now that they're older, they just don't know how to dance. So then they created a dance class specifically for ajummas. And then it was so beautiful because all these ajummas got to learn how to dance for the first time in old age. And that article, I can't find it, but it really warmed my heart, and I wanted to incorporate that in my book. Just the joy of being at a certain age and knowing you've done it. You've done everything you could, and now it's your turn to finally live your life.
Yes.
I really wanted to play with that.
But I love the idea of a culture too celebrating and recognizing the role of women in rebuilding after war. So often, I think in many cultures, it's like, well, who are the men? Who were the great men that built or rebuilt a country? But a culture that says, look at these women, and they were the ones that really were at work. And, we heard that from the author of Dust Child, too, and the rebuilding of Vietnam, and a recognition what role women played in that.
Yeah. A lot of Korean women that came of age during the Korean War, they've had such hard lives, and men as well.
Yeah.
And it's just now that generation, they're older now, and it's like, now I can live my life and have hobbies and do things and celebrate.
Well, there's so many wonderful themes in this book. I feel like we've just scratched the surface, but I know our listeners will want to know, what are you working on next?
So I wrote this novel before my MFA. So I started an MFA at the University of British Columbia after I finished my novel.
Wow.
But one good thing about doing an MFA is you get to dip in different genres. So I've taken courses in filmmaking and nonfictions. I have these little projects burning and I have to kind of commit to one, but I've been having a lot of fun with screenwriting and nonfiction, maybe fiction, but because this novel took 20 years to write, my next novel, I could be dead. So I'm wondering, maybe I should try a different genre rather than die halfway, because statistically, I might not be alive. So maybe another genre, I'll get it done faster.
You know, you could do a movie out of this book.
Yes.
Yeah, sure. If there's any people listening that want to make a movie, reach out. Filmmakers.
So how can people stay in touch with what you're up to and see what might be coming from you next?
I'm active on Instagram. My Instagram handle is sweet_baby_Jane. And I have a Facebook as well. And I also have Substack, which right now it's slowly getting into gear. So I plan to be more committed to Substack once the promotional kind of phase is over, because I do like long form writing.
Very good. Thank you so much for joining us on the front porch. It was such a delight to talk to you and delve into some of these themes that we were really enjoying as we read your book. But the story itself, the plot, the characters, so engaging. But boy, some of these underlying themes, the layers are so intriguing. And it was really fun to talk to you.
Thank you for reading my book and just for these great questions and having me on your front porch.
Thank you for coming. It was lovely meeting you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Well, Nancy, wasn't that a nice interview?
I loved talking with Jane. And do you feel like you learned a lot too?
I did learn a lot. This is not just a fiction book, because this is real experiences of people. Mm-hmm. And so there's a serious component in here. There's a lot of themes of racism and struggle and generational trauma and poverty and drug addiction.
Yeah.
Now we're going to get real depressed. But those are real life experiences for people. But the book is so enjoyable to read and really fall in love with each of the characters. And I think her respect for her community and the struggle of immigrants and sort of that protective nature that she said that she kind of has, like, I'm going to take care of these people, that really comes out through this book.
It totally does. When she talked about finishing the 20% of the novel that she hadn't and having a more maternal instinct toward those characters, I thought, boy, there was a loving maternal presence taking care of those characters. You can tell sometimes when an author is writing a character and they don't really like the character, but you could tell that there is a very benevolent spirit that is the umbrella of this novel, that these people are trying their best. They are loving people. Sometimes the way that they show love can be harmful, but they are loving people. And because they're loving people and you see the good in them, you want the best for them. And so when they fall, you feel it so deeply. That's the mark of a really good novel, I think.
Yeah. And this is her first one?
Right.
Wow.
And after she wrote the novel, then she decided to get her master's in fine arts, which for most people, they would get the creative writing master and then work toward publishing a novel. But she's forging her own path here. Very impressive.
Kudos for her. She has a bright future there.
She sure does. And just super fun to talk to, and fun to talk about generally that experience of second generation immigrants and the pressure. And you think of just a typical family, the pressure and the trauma that just can happen within an individual family. But here you're talking about an entire community of people. And I thought she represented that so well in the novel too, that there was this widespread Korean community, but they are all checking in on one another, trying to outdo one another, but also feeling somewhat insular from the majority community. boy, she just represents all of that so, so well.
Yeah.
There's a saying in writing that the specific is the universal. And I think in this case, we get into the specifics of the second generation experience, but it feels like it is very resonant with trauma in any family, with expectations in any family, with substance abuse in any family, with skewed dynamics in terms of parental expectations. And that's why I think there is going to be a much greater audience for this book than maybe she had originally thought, because in the specifics of that second generation experience, you're getting the universal experience of some of these themes.
And you think, oh my golly, like she studied World War II trauma.
Yes.
People. Now, I'm very fascinated with that. So that might actually be my next read.
Look at you go.
Isn't it something, Nancy? Isn't it something? I can appreciate her saying, oh, like I thought I was really writing for the people that had similar experiences. And I'm thinking, no, I think lots of groups of people will love reading this because those themes are understandable in so many different ways. Mm-hmm. Plus, just for me, I learned so much. I didn't even know about Confucianism. I mean, a little bit, but not to the level that she is. And I didn't realize that that was the ideology where some of this stuff was coming from. I thought it was just culture. I didn't realize it was coming from Confucius.
I completely agree. I just thought it was cultural. And I didn't think deeper about, well, okay, so from within the culture, what is the motivating force?
Right.
I would have never come up with Confucianism.
Right, especially because, and we didn't get there, but at one point you realize that the mother's reading the Bible. So they're a Christian family.
Right.
But still, I mean, this ideology of, you get your ideology lots of different places. But anyway, fascinating discussion.
Yeah.
Interesting lady. Fun book to read. Interesting book to read, I think would be a better way of saying that.
Well, everyone, thanks for listening. Our website is frontporchbookclub.com, and I will have links to all of the books that we talked about on our episode notes.
Our episodes come out twice a month on the first and third Wednesday of every month.
See you next time, Linny.
See you, Nancy.